To welcome everyone to our first HR Trends with Friends webinar. My name is Tom Nichols. I am the founder of Castle HR, and I'm hosting this webinar alongside the amazing Glenn Donaldson, who is the Chief Customer Officer at IntelliHR. Today, we're extremely pleased to have two amazing speakers, each covering a top-of-mind topic that is going around. But first off, a bit of housekeeping. As you saw in the invites, this is a jam-packed webinar with some brilliant content. So we have actually trimmed out the Q&A portion. If you do have questions, you certainly can punch it into the Q&A section, and we'll try and get back to you post-webinar. But we're also going to send out a follow-up email that will have our contact information, so you can feel to reach out at that point if you have any questions. And also, if your boss calls or your kid comes into the room asking for a cookie and you miss some content, we have you covered. We're also going to be sending out a recording of this webinar in that same email. So don't worry about that. And getting into it, today, Glenn will be chatting with two absolute HR rock stars, Robyn and MaryLisa, both of Castle HR. Who will be leveraging their 40 years combined experience to talk about how to create epic values that provide impact to your business. With a lot of companies, that's top of mind, revisiting the new normal. And speaking of that, no one's able to go on an airplane these days. So how do you manage those unused vacation days that are accumulating on your organization's balance sheet? So those are the two topics, but I'm not the one chatting about it. So let's not dilly-dally. And I will hand it over to Glenn and Robyn to start it off with the values conversation.
Great. Thanks, Tom. It's amazing to be here today, joined by yourself, Robyn, MaryLisa, and Tom as well. Robyn, all right, I know we've been talking about this over the past few days with each other, and it's obviously a really hot topic at the moment around companies' values. I think now more than ever, it's so important for companies to have strong values, and if they don't, start to really think about how they actually form them and pull together. But I guess my first question that I want to explore with you, Robyn, is why should companies have values? What makes them important?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important question. We get that a lot of times from our clients. Many of the clients that we work with have an established mission and vision, but sometimes they haven't identified what their core values are, or in this case with COVID, they suspect they might need to change. Values we see are an important part of the equation because they tell people how you are going to behave to get to that mission. What do you believe in, and how do you want to see that through? So values are something that we recommend you should consider when you're making your hiring decisions, as well as evaluating someone's performance. And you will notice that their values are slowly ingrained into the culture that will affect how people behave on a daily basis. If you think about your hiring needs, let's take a startup company who needs a high-performing team, and they might have a value that says, do whatever it takes to achieve the mission. But if you've hired somebody whose personal value is work-life balance, you're going to have a mismatch. So if you have those values identified, it can really help you during the recruitment process to make sure that you're bringing like-minded people on board who believe in the same things that you do to help get your company to where they want to be. When we take a look at things like performance, values often touch on soft skills. So this will help you have those conversations when you're dealing with somebody's performance. So one example, I always like to look at Netflix. They have some really cool values. One of them is they've got courage, curiosity, as well as passion. So if you have an employee in that company who's become complacent, they're underperforming, this is a great way to bring the values into that conversation to say, hey, listen, I notice you've lost your passion. You don't really have that courage and curiosity. You're not meeting the values that we have within this company. And now you can start to talk about that. And it takes away kind of the sensitivity of those conversations. And the last point I wanted to make, as I mentioned, the values will influence how people behave within your organization. So if you have a value such as customers first, that's going to help give your employees confidence when they're dealing with customers to know that how they behave or the decisions that they make will have the backing of the company behind them, because the company's saying customer first, do whatever it takes to make them happy, and that will help your employee move forward in their own decision-making process. So lots of great reasons to have values within your company.
Absolutely. I really resonate with that a lot. Even as a software company, we were a startup and going through the process of acquiring, top tier talent and looking at how we really pull those teams together and really focus them. One of our values is actually all about the customer, or customer focused. And so that was a really cool driving force as we were building our product to kind of go, at the end of the day, that's the value that ties it back. This is why we're doing it. And I think when you don't have those values, it does start to become a little confusing on the employee side. And as you said, you can start to have that mismatch. So I guess then, Robyn, how would a company go about establishing their values then? So either as a new company, they don't have values, or maybe even revisiting them post this pandemic. I know a lot of companies have evolved and shifted through this. How might they change those values or go about setting them?
Yeah, absolutely. The way we run our exercise is actually almost the same, whether or not you have values currently or you're looking to establish values from the ground up, because things are constantly changing. So I think asking the same questions, even if you answer them with the values that you have, you're just reaffirming that that's still what they are, or you might come up with new ideas to realize that your values are kind of old and stale. So typically what we do is we start the discussion with who should be involved. I usually recommend at the bare minimum, we involve the senior leadership team as a starting point, but if there is opportunity to integrate the larger team or even the entire company, that's something that we support and work with as well. When we go through this exercise, I always stress to the team, we need to keep this simple. Simple is key. When people think about values, they always think of these grand things that you see on people's websites, making a difference for the greater good. But we go through an exercise where we're asking questions and we want you to write down what comes top of mind first, and it should be simple, 1 or 2 words. So during the first meeting, what we do is we go through a series of questions that, again, will bring up some values. And we take the answers to those questions and we populate it into a word cloud. So sometimes people think, oh my gosh, there's 10 people, everybody's going to have 5 or 6 words. Now we're going to have 60 words. Our word cloud's going to explode. But I assure you, as we've gone through these exercises time and time again, there's usually only 4 to 6 concepts. So once we take a look at that word cloud, we will go through and try to figure out, what similarities we see and start to lump them into similar categories. And that will help draw our attention to what the true values of the company are. And so once those values have been established, we go through another series of questions to make sure that we are comfortable with where we're setting those. And once the values have been established, we look at creating a plan. We want to make sure that there's a way to recognize, there's a way to reward. Oftentimes, the biggest pitfall to a values program is having a short-term excitement behind it, and then everything is forgotten. One of the big things with values we find is that if they are a true value within the organization, they actually shouldn't be very difficult to enforce and encourage and reward, because they're already behaviors that are demonstrated amongst the team. So I think it is really key to remember that through this whole process. My favorite question I always like to leave people with when you are going through this exercise is, would you fire someone for not demonstrating this value? I think that goes a long way, because if it is that important to you and to your organization and to the culture, oftentimes companies will. They will make that termination decision. So it is really important that you're picking values that are true to who your organization is.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people would struggle to actually objectively look at their 5 or 6 or 4 values and go, okay, this is what I would, consider as a fireable offense if I didn't see that represented in my business. Or a development need there. It's funny that you mentioned those type of concepts around, collecting the data and word bubbles, because it's something that we have personally done within our own business as well, where we actually look at as your company values are established across your business, starting to actually engage with more employees across the areas around how they think and feel about the values and starting to understand their sentiment when it comes to it. And similar to what you're sort of saying, you can start with the senior leadership team, but then you really kind of want to start to look at how you ingrain and embed them into the culture. So even asking some questions around, how aligned would you feel to our values? What values do you think are missing that are constantly represented across our business? It's what are you not resonating with as closely as others? I think when you start to actually ask those questions after or even during the exercises that you were talking about, Robyn, you actually start to get some really cool pieces of data that, again, is the sentiment from the employees. I think a lot of companies do struggle to know where that starting point is. And I think a really cool way to think about it is your employees are essentially making up your values. Your employees are making up your culture. And I think when you pull all that together, it can really start to focus in on the purpose. And I loved your concept just around the word bubbles as well, because what we've found when we've ran this with not only in our own company, but with actually businesses that we've worked with, is asking some of those questions can start to really, again, highlight some key trends and so on. So even just this question, what values do you think are missing that are constantly represented across our business? Might be nothing, or it might be actually things that have evolved with the business that actually has gone under the radar or is represented in pockets or different areas of the business that people just weren't aware of or senior leadership weren't aware of. When we ran this activity, actually, it was funny because we did find some things when we ran them in individual groups across the business units. Areas that kind of stuck out were creativity, integrity, things that we just really didn't account for at the start. And so I love your thinking and ideas there around, particularly around the word bubbles, and pulling that data together, I think is absolutely key. So I guess, what are some of the key questions then that you would say people should ask when establishing their values?
Yeah, so the questions that we ask, and this could be asked to anybody, it could be, with the CEO, the owner, as well as the leadership team, even all the way down to the busiest worker bee that you have. I think anybody in any position would be able to add value to answering these questions. So some of the questions we like to include are, why do customers choose your product? What makes our star employees so amazing? What do I want people to think of when they hear our company's name? And what brought us all together and continues to hold us together? So oftentimes a really true value will actually answer more than one of these questions. But like I said, anybody at any stage of the company really could add value here.
Excellent. I love these questions. And I think as well, as you just sort of said, a value could almost answer each one of these questions, particularly around what do we want people to think about when we hear our company's name? And I think that's really kind of the core of it, right? Like, you have to be proud of your company. You have to be really driving your employees to want to be representing your brand and your business as purely and as strongly as possible. I love that. I absolutely love that. So Robyn, should a business, I know we touched on this a little bit before, but should a business then involve everyone in setting values, or is this just something that you see more effective at a leadership team level? What's your thoughts?
Absolutely. Yeah, this can vary depending on the size, the age, the organizational culture that we're dealing with. I usually recommend, like I said at the beginning, at least the leadership team participates. However, there are opportunities and significant benefits to involving a larger group or even the whole company. The obvious reason being that the more people you involve, the more buy-in and agreement you're going to get with the values, and this can be very impactful for the company. But there's many ways that you could do it. Glenn, I know with the way that you guys have your platform, what kind of ways can this be done to integrate the employees?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done this exercise a few times, and some particular customers that did it really well was even just asking a really basic set of questions. So what values should our company adopt? We find it's very effective when you actually go to all the different levels. The actual setting process or the creation process might still want to stick with senior leadership teams, or at least, even just sort of leadership teams across different business areas. But one of the functions that or one of the processes that we've ran before is each kind of business area pulling together as a team and actually just starting to discuss and look at what makes their team special, what drives them, and what they really feel kind of motivates them. Similar to the questions that you were talking about, what do we want people to think and feel about us? But when you ask these sort of questions, what values should our company adopt? Why did we suggest those values? It really starts to allow, that sort of thinking and collection of thinking in a business. So even just asking this question, again, you can start to actually see what makes up those, or what should make up the values within the business. And you know what? It's kind of funny because usually when we run these activities or what we see customers when they use this sort of process is it's not too far aligned to what they were originally thinking. The values are quite a core makeup of a lot of businesses, even if they're unheard, if they're not as, tangible or easily visible across the business. Usually when you get this sort of data in and you're analyzing it, you can actually see, okay, well, you know what? We've seen a lot of this behavior before. We've seen how this has tied back to performance before. And so it's almost like a reassurance. This is kind of a reassurance step to kind of say, okay, we can see employees are really aligned here. Let's see what we can do with these sort of values. Is that kind of similar to how you would see that, Robyn, working?
Oh, absolutely. It's always a challenge when we look at who's going to be involved, because I can certainly resonate with owners and CEOs who might be hesitant in involving the employees. So again, with the survey function, there's so many different ways that you can do it. You could survey the employees to identify new values. You could survey them to give you examples of behaviors that demonstrate the values that the leadership team selected. So you can kind of control, how much involvement you get from the employees. But I think, no matter how much, whether it's the whole process, a little piece of the process, I think just having their input in there makes those values so much stronger.
And I guess my last thought and question, Robyn, before we move on is, does tenure affect this? Is there an issue where, people might be very new to the business? We've done this before where people have only been there for a couple of months, maybe even only just a month, and they're doing these value setting exercises. Is that a bad thing? Is that actually a good thing? Fresh eyes in the business?
Oh, absolutely. You know what? And for them, I mean, especially you think about a new hire, they might not understand what is acceptable in the business, but they certainly can add value and perspective to what they've seen go on. And that speaks tremendously to what a value is, right? You need to see that behavior being demonstrated all the time. You need to see that belief system in place. And so I think even within a week or two of a new hire being there, they would have a really good idea of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in the workplace and what those values may be. So I would include everybody. And sometimes you look at the flip side where the more senior employees actually might have kind of missed stuff because they're just used to the way things are. This is how they used to be done. And so, there's pros and cons to both ends, but everybody at the end of the day can put their input in and it'll help to shape those values as a whole.
Excellent. I love it, Robyn. We could probably talk for hours on this topic. But look, I really appreciate your time and diving into some of those key questions there.
Likewise.
MaryLisa, now we can't travel anywhere. We can't go on vacation. So I am excited to talk about this just because it will let me fantasize about taking some vacation leave. But
that's not true. You'd rather be talking about planning a vacation and where you're going instead of a webinar on excessive vacation balances, but that's okay.
Yes, exactly that. Well, look, thanks for jumping on and having a chat to me today about vacation leave. It's an interesting topic because it's obviously one that's very different globally. I think each region handles vacation leave really differently. But I guess my first question, MaryLisa, is why should companies be thinking about vacation leave or thinking about a vacation time strategy?
Well, as the times are very different with COVID and most people haven't used their vacation at the same frequency anyway as they traditionally do, it becomes a liability to the company to have these large balances of unused vacation. Whether it's a funded or unfunded liability, it's still an issue, and organizations should focus on how to address that.
Absolutely. So then what are the options, MaryLisa, for companies to get this vacation leave off their balance sheet?
Well, there's a number of approaches. And again, you have to look at your culture and your organization and govern yourself accordingly. The first option always is to get individuals to utilize their vacation. Yes, it's going to look a little different. These staycations have just as much benefit, and sometimes even more than, you know, planning an exotic adventure somewhere. So people getting away from work reduces burnout, it increases their productivity. There's so many amazing health benefits as to why individuals should have vacation. So the first option is talk to your staff, get them to utilize vacation, even though it's going to look a little different. The second option is to roll over some vacation, so allow them to bring it forward to the next vacation year. However, you have to be really aware that there's legislative compliances on the minimum amount of vacation people need in a year, so you have to be aware of that. So in Ontario, for example, it's 2 weeks, and I know in Australia it's what, 4 weeks? So
yeah,
it's pretty, but you still, even if your entitlement is more than the legislative minimum, they have to have that minimum. So make sure they take their 2 weeks, and you can always look at rolling over the excess to take in another year. However, you have to be really aware that if you're rolling over and everyone's rolling over and then travel resumes or the new normal happens, you don't want everyone off at the same time with all these vacation entitlements too, because you have to concern yourself with efficiencies within your organization and not have everyone off. The third option is force use, and that would be more like a structured, we're going to close down every other Friday. We're going to close down between Christmas and New Year's, and everyone's going to use vacation. Sometimes taking a statutory holiday and making it a little bit longer, for example, could be an option of force use. And then the final option, and again, it'll depend on the fiscal position of a company, is to pay out unused vacation. As long as the minimum legislative portions have been taken, there's always the option of paying out.
Awesome. You're just cutting out a little bit.
And not all of those are available to everyone. Oh, we okay now?
That's okay, yeah,
me?
we're caught up. That's all right.
Okay.
Well, look, I'm really interested in those 4 options that you've just sort of raised there. We might release a really quick poll out for our listeners. So you should see on your screen right now, which option is more likely to be adopted for your business? The employee use, so encouraging employees to use their leave, rolling it over, forcing use, or maybe even paying out, buying that leave back. So we'll have that poll up there running. While we wait for those responses to come back through, MaryLisa, could a company then that doesn't have a forced use option in place create a one-time event to do that?
Most likely, yes. It'll depend on the type of employment agreement you have with your staff. However, introducing a one-time policy or a use it, lose it sort of approach in these times is quite acceptable to do. However, you want to get the buy-in of your staff. So it depends on the scenario, it depends on your business, and it depends on your situation. But yes, it is not, I don't think it'd be against any sort of issue related to an employment agreement if you introduce that.
Okay, excellent. So then how would you see that force use working? How might a company do that?
Well, it really depends on your business cycle and how you want to review this. But it's important to get input every company is different. There isn't one universal strategy that I would implement or suggest. You could do a survey. You could communicate with your staff, have your virtual town hall meetings and see what it is. But I'd survey your team as to how you would best like to introduce that and provide options, because as we know that anything where there's buy-in is accepted at a much higher adoption rate.
Absolutely. I think similar to what Robyn was talking before around the values, it's around understanding your employees' sentiment and where they're at, and not even just that, responding to this new normal of work, but even just emotionally or well-being wise. Do they need to take that vacation? Do they need that time off? Or how are they thinking they might better want to manage their time away from the business? I think that's really key. So I totally resonate with you there, MaryLisa, around the surveying. Okay, so you should be able to see the poll results on your screen. Okay, so this is quite interesting, MaryLisa. So 55% of listeners have said that the business will likely just wait for the employees to take that leave and continue to just encourage that leave is okay to take during this time. Might not be a vacation, more a staycation, but that's okay. And then we didn't have any listeners who said anything about buying back. What's your thoughts on this, MaryLisa?
I'm not surprised by these numbers. And one of the things you can do to help address that first is encouraging your employees. And it's very well documented, and literature really supports the benefits of why individuals need vacation. So even sharing those benefits, like some of the statistics are amazing as it relates to the health benefits and the productivity when someone returns. But I mean, the research out there is staggering in that, a week of vacation reduces heart issues. Mm-hmm. It's so sharing that sort of information with your employees and sharing your expectation regarding stepping away is important. But it's also really important when they do step away, don't email them questions, right? Like, don't be contacting them, because a break needs to be away from the workplace and away from the worries and concerns. So that would be my recommendation to make that number one successful. And we can help with things like that. We have a lot of literature that we could share. We could help with the surveys as to what the employees' preferences are, and we could go from there.
Absolutely. I think that's really key, right? And it's also, leaders in a business need to be really comfortable with the new normal and encouraging people to take leave. And as you said, totally switch off. I think everyone has experienced this, where you're on 24/7 now. We're working in our office, right, and it's very easy to blend the two. So I guess,
and they need to see their leaders step away too.
100% lead by example. I think that is. Okay, so MaryLisa, let's wrap up with a final thought. Best practice a company should follow then around vacation leave. If you could leave us with something.
Well, there is no best, it depends, as Robyn said, on your values. Every company is going to be different. And you can't do a cookie cutter and say it's the best strategy. It really has to be individualized for your organization, for your staff. It has to fit in with your operational requirements, right? So if you have a tax year end of a certain month and there's a no-go for vacations, and you're not changing that, communicate that, right? It's open, transparent communications. That's the key to make this successful.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, look, thank you so much, MaryLisa, for talking about that with me. Very interesting. Tom, I'm going to hand this one back to you.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thanks so much to Robyn and MaryLisa for sharing that great information, and especially for Glenn for getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to facilitate these conversations. Also wanted to thank Kelsey from IntelliHR for getting up and putting this together, as well as Alec from Castle. Did a lot of work on the background, which I am not able to do, and you guys are wizards. Lastly, again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You probably have some of our contact information. It'll also be shared with the recording of the webinar in the follow-up email. And if you enjoyed this topic, we'll be announcing our second webinar soon, which will include how to calculate the true cost of employee turnover. So spoiler, it's probably higher than you think. So stay tuned, and we'll send out invites for that. Other than that, thank you everybody for coming out, and have a wonderful day. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.